Hello Internet! Welcome to another episode of Romney's Reviews. Little housekeeping first. I couldn't get a review done last week because I was really sick. That night I had to study for midterms. I'm just barely getting over a cold, so I may sound kind of funny, and I'm not that familiar with the John Carter stories. I didn't even know who John Carter was, didn't even know about the John Carter on Mars stuff until I saw some of the things from beyond the trailer, as well as being informed by my younger brother who has read all the stories. Instead of opting for the usual story summary this time, I'm gonna just jump straight into what actually worked. The framing device where they brought in Edgar Rice Burroughs was kind of weird, but it's not like the main focus of the story, which I kind of liked. It was basically just sort of a framing device to set things up that would happen at the end of the film. One thing I didn't expect, and again, I'm not familiar with the John Carter stories, but I didn't expect the main character to be a former Confederate soldier. That was actually kind of surprising, and it's probably a good thing they didn't advertise that in the trailer because, well, again, people are stupid, people will freak out over anything and everything. Another thing I liked is that they didn't try to do the whole thing with sci-fi stories where suddenly the aliens can speak your same language as you. They actually have them starting out speaking different languages, have some little miscommunication stuff happen, and also give a very plausible way for John Carter to learn how to speak to the Martians. Either ways, the fact that they didn't have them speaking English right off the bat, it was kind of it was a refreshing thing. It actually was realistic, because if we were to suddenly find a whole bunch of aliens on Mars, there's no guarantee that they would have the same language or even the same knowledge, which is another thing I like, because they didn't call Mars Mars on Mars. That is a very confusing sentence. But basically, instead of being called Mars, the inhabitants of Mars call their planet Barsoom, and they call Earth Jasum, at least if I'm remembering it correctly. And it's actually kind of interesting because it kind of literally creates this whole other world where there's this whole separate history, all these separate names for things, a separate basis of science. Instead of sailing on water, they sail on light. And that was cool. And the film does a really good job establishing all this weird technology and all this weird stuff that we're suddenly being introduced to. And John Carter does a good job of playing the everyman that carries on through the story. So I think the reason that this movie kind of stands out against other films that rely on special effects is because this is directed by someone who used to work at Pixar, Andrew Stanton. Whereas George Lucas normally directs live action. So if you're making a film that relies a lot on special effects, and you get someone who's used to working in computer animation, for example, with Pixar, then chances are they'll have a better idea of how to make things look a little more realistic. And there's definitely some moments in there that give it that Pixar kind of feel, like little subtle injections of comedy amongst the drama. It's not like it's an openly comedic scene that you see in a lot of the fantasy action adventure films. These ones are really subtle. The performances in this film were pretty interesting, but there wasn't really one performance that really stood out. And again, if I talk about the villains, that would also be technically considered a spoiler for a lot of people who haven't seen the film, but let's just say the people they have playing the villains and the true villains are pretty interesting. They made a lot of good casting choices here, and there were some actors that I didn't even realize were in there. If I watched the film again, I'd probably be able to point it out, but again, it was surprising. The next thing that I noticed, that even with all the special effects they have in it, they still do some pretty interesting stuff with the live action cinematography, particularly when John Carter is first on Mars. Instead of just doing it on a green screen, they actually shot out, I'm guessing, in Utah, which is kind of, for those of you who don't live in Utah, is kind of a big thing for those of us who do live here in Utah, because a lot of films are shot in the deserts and the Arches and Goblin Valley and Kanab and all those fun places. And so whenever we get a huge big budget film here in Utah, it's actually kind of a big deal. And so it was pretty cool, just a lot of the rack focuses they did, some of the more subtle cinematography moves. And a lot of the stuff you could kind of tell was kind of lifted from a lot of Pixar films with the way a lot of these shots came out, instead of immediately going for the reverse shot that you see in other films that rely on special effects and green screen technology. The characters were really engaging. And again, although the performances didn't really stand out, I think that was kind of the point, because the thing is that you don't suddenly think, oh, this actor's doing a really good job with this scene. It's just hey, I like this character. That's how it's supposed to work. Overall, I think this film is a really great film. It's one of the kind of films that got me into film in the first place. The kind that really stimulates the imagination, creates this whole other world, really pulls you in and lets you explore another place. Sometimes figuratively, but also literally. On my personal scale, I give John Carter a 5 out of 5. That's the highest rating that I give to any movie. There's only been one other movie I've given that rating, and I didn't even get to write a review for it. So, for the full review on John Carter, as well as other reviews and articles, please visit the Globe's website at www.globeslcc.com.